Alright, so I got Wing Leader Legends. It's an expansion from GMT. I did a video for GMT of the, like the box opening. It doesn't really come in a box, but showed you what you get with this new expansion. And what I've got going on here is I've set up the Raid on Nanjing scenario. And it's got some new planes in it. Some Chinese, some Japanese from 1937. So we have some really interesting 1930s era aircraft fighting in a battle. It's got no ground targets. The advanced bombing rules are not used in this particular scenario, so it's a pretty easy one to jump right into. We do got some scattered, or I should say broken clouds over some of the zones where I have the marker straddling two zones. It's considered to be in both. I just do that to keep the board nice and neat. And run through a couple of turns. The Chinese fighters are gasping for air, trying to get altitude, because that's what the game is about. It's a side-on view of aerial combat in World War II, and so it's all about intercepts. If you were to take a top-down view, these fighters are coming from all kinds of different directions, but we're actually just looking at the altitude perspective on it, and it's a really cool effect. The end result of it is actually a very good simulation. So we got some P-26s, some CR-32s imported from Italy. We have some Goshawks. They're in, everything that's marked here is actually in here. And so we have some Goshawks involved in the battle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a battle out, and I'm going to show you the outcome of this big aerial engagement happening in this battle. All right, got a cool combat situation developing here. We have some Japanese Suzy light bombers, the D-1As. Got a squadron of those. They've been tallied by two different squadrons of BF-2C Goshawks, or they're called Hawk 3s, the export version that the Chinese Air Force is using. Got some A5M Claudes. This is only a flight. Notice there's only one image of a fighter on there, so it's only one. That's a flight, not a squadron. So fewer numbers of escorts. So this guy here tallied the bombers. They're moving in for the attack. He is responding to that, and this one is also moving in. So it's a complex situation. But because the Claudes are involved in the combat, even though they're tallying him and coming in last, as it were, the issue is going to be that because there's a bomber here, the Chinese are going to be the primary attackers here. So the initiative is theirs, and they get to choose whether they're going to use speed or whether they're going to use their turning ability in this particular combat. If they're going to make it a speed combat or a turning combat. They're going to choose to make it a turning combat, and the reason for that is their ratings are abysmal on speed, but they got a good turning radius. Now the Claudes are going to be, we're going to use their ratings for the defense. And they got good speed and good, well, relatively for 1930s, good speed and good turning radius. Problem for the Claudes, though, is that they all have rigid doctrine, which is going to hurt them on defense. So the net end result is they're going to be firing on the -2 column, while the Hawks are going to be up on the +3. The reason for that is they got a radius of 4, or a rating of 4 for turning, so that's 4. An extra squadron puts them at 5, and that's it. These guys got a rating of 5. The dive doesn't help them at all here. So they got a rating of 5 for turn radius, but they're flight, so that comes down to 3. Rigid doctrine brings them down to 2. So the Chinese are going to be firing on the +3 column. The Japanese are going to be firing on the +2 column, the -2 column, not the -3, because they have the edge. So that gives them a little bit of a nudge up. Unfortunately for them, their die roll result is a 6, which is not going to inflict any hits. There's no modifiers for them in this situation. Now the Chinese, they rolled an 11, and they've got an expert fighter, and so that's going to push it up to a 12. So they're going to inflict 4 hits on the Japanese. So we're going to put 2 hits on the D-1As, 2 hits on the A5Ms, and then what we're going to do is after that is we're going to roll dice, and we're going to see what those results are going to be. So the hits have got to be confirmed, and then we got to roll for every one of the participants in the combat on the cohesion table to find out what happens to the formation. And really for the defenders here, the interceptors here, what they want to do is break up the formation of those bombers. That's the main part of the mission here. Okay, as we roll for the losses, we're going to take 1 die. roll it for each of the losses. If we roll less than the protection rating on the aircraft itself, there's no loss. If we roll equal to protection, there's a straggler. If there's already a straggler, it gets flipped to a loss. If we roll greater than the protection, that's what we're looking for. Those are kills. Firepower modifiers. We're going to see if the primary combatant has Experta. If that's the case, that's going to be a +1. If the primary combatant has gyro gun sights, none of these 1930 guys do. It was not a head-on combat situation, and there's no gun pods involved. So there's going to be a +1 to the Chinese because they do have that one expert fighter. So we're going to use the red Japanese dice here for the 2 hits on the Clods. The Clod, if we look at his card here, the Clod has a protection rating of 3. So basically, we're looking for anything but 1s. 2s will even give us a result with the modifier. So, all right, this becomes a 3, which will be a straggler. That becomes a kill. So what we'll do is we'll take the markers, we'll put the straggler onto the Clod. He's O. So come over here and put that on the O. And if he gets another straggler, that will be a kill. And then the loss will also go onto his display. We use the Chinese dice here for the 2 Susies. And the protection rating is the same for them. There's a 3. And we got, and there's no, I should also point out, you also add the firepower rating to your die roll. But these are all 1930s planes that don't have very great firepower either. So no rating for him. For any of these combatants in this battle. So the 2 becomes a 3. That's a straggler. 4. Sorry, I'll show you the results. That's a kill. That's a straggler. So pretty much the same effect here on the bomber. So we'll put a straggler on the bomber and a kill on the bomber. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to roll out the cohesion for all the participants. We're going to roll 2 dice. We're going to add some modifiers to that. We're going to look at the total number of loss markers, not stragglers. If they're veteran or green, none of those are going to apply. Whether they're the attacking side in the combat, none of the Japanese were, but the Chinese will get a +1 to those. If they're in a Lufbury, which they're not, squadron with no radio, none of these guys have radio, so all of these are going to get that -1 modifier. And the ammo situation is going to apply per the marker. And if there's a weather modifier, which there isn't in the current zone, this is taking place in this particular zone here, so no weather for them. So just for the Clods, for example, we'll roll those guys out. They are going to have a -1. They're going to have a -2, and that's going to be it on the table. They're going to use the fighter column. They really need to get a 7 or more final result. So they're going to need to roll 9 or higher to stay in the battle. Otherwise, they're going to be disrupted and out of the battle. Flights don't just disrupt, they just break. So roll for him. He rolls really well, so he is going to stay in the fight. And what we'll do is we will give him a blue ammo marker here. So the next time he's going to get a -1 in addition to everything else. So the Clod stays in it. The D1 is going to have the same modifiers. And so -2, that's a 7, but they're on a different column. The bombers, you got to roll much lower to disrupt their formations. So, and that is a squadron, so he would have disrupted before he breaks. And that's what you're trying to do, because that knocks down the victory points in this type of a scenario. So that did not take place here. Now the Chinese are going to roll. They're going to get +1 for being the attacker, -1 for radio, and Squadron F has already shot once, so they got a -1. So their net is -1, and the guy with the expert fighter, he's just going to be a straight up roll. So, oh, that's a bad result right there. So the F is going to break. So we're going to put a broken on him. He loses his tally, and he's got to go home. He's out of the fight. He can still be shot at and stuff, but usually it's not worth the effort to chase those guys down when there's still other attacking squadrons. So for the expert, he's a 6. It's a straight up roll. He stays in it, but his formation is deranged somewhat, so he's going to get a disrupted marker that's going to impact his ability to stay in the fight. Later on, if he disrupts again, he'll break and be out of the fight, but he gets to keep his tally. We should also adjust the tallies so that actually, no, we don't have to because he was in the fight. He did tally. So everybody's tallied up. Everything's good. And I think that's going to be the end of that particular combat situation. The defenders, if they stay in it, can try to hold the attacker into a dogfight. And that's one way that you can perhaps protect your bombers. So we'll roll that one out next. All right, so what we're going to do now is we are going to test to see whether the Clods can hold the remaining Hawk Squadron into a dogfight. So we're going to look at the speed rating. He's got a rating of 3. He's got a rating of 2. We're going to roll dice, and so the difference between them is a +1 to the Japanese. Their speed rating is 1 greater than the Chinese. So the Chinese are just going to roll straight die roll. They're going to roll a die, and we're going to add 1 to it. If the Japanese roll high, they can keep them in a dogfight. It's not in the Chinese interest to get into a dogfight with the Clods. They want to keep going after the bombers, so they're going to try to refuse dogfight. Rolling the 2 dice, and it's a tie, so the Chinese are able to stay out of the dogfight and can still keep going after and pestering the bombers. So the end result of this combat is kind of mixed. The Chinese racked up some points, but they failed to disrupt the formation of the bombers, so that doesn't exactly help them the way that they need to be helped. So that's the end result of this combat, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Probably do a few more of these from Wing Leader. It's a really cool system, very novel approach to aerial combat in World War II, taking the side-on view as opposed to the traditional top-down view of intercepts. And the combat it really is a slick system. The combat and everything feels so thematic when you play the game. It's one of my favorites in my collection. Hope you enjoy this.